Hey, and welcome back to the number one podcast in a sport where it's fight week and the biggest fight of the year. I know people say the undisputed fight was the biggest, but this is an all British heavyweight clash. This is Wembley. This is 96,000 people. This is Hearn. This is Warren. This is Shalom. This is everybody, the great and the good. We are going to see absolutely everybody show up for this. And this is what we wanted as boxing fans, right? And maybe this is what Turkey's realized. The Riyadh season cards don't make sense if you can't show that wild, raucous crowd. He would have seen, having been at the UFC over the weekend, he would have seen the impact the right arena and the right atmosphere can have in terms of raising the appeal of Riyadh season. So what I wanted to do was, and I'm going to split this into two parts just because it's easier to think that way. And it means that I'm not going to leave anything on the table when I talk about the preview. Maybe it's three parts. Maybe it's Joshua, maybe it's Dubois, and then the rest of the card. I don't know, but it's something along those lines. But I want to start with Daniel because he's a champion and it's the right thing to do. But I also think all the big unknowns sit with Daniel because he hasn't been at this level before. And he hasn't had to do this. Yes, he's faced a big 6'6" monster before. Yeah, 100%. But that was during the pandemic, if I remember correctly. He didn't have to do it in front of, essentially in front of the nation, right? He didn't have to do that. And now in facing Anthony Joshua, he does. He has to ask himself, how bad do I want this? This thing I talked about, this thing of emulating guys like Mike Tyson and being a world champion in multiple defenses, in big fights in big arenas, being that face of the sport. This is everything he said he wanted. This is his moment. What does he do? So what I wanted to do was sort of look at it as if, if you're training Dubois, how do you get him ready to win this? Because this is a big ask. This is a huge ask. So let's just roll through it in sequence, right? You've gone from Lorena, who they pulled up from cruiserweight, and while he was in there, he was able to ask questions. You go from Lorena to Usyk, like that's a massive leap. And he was able to ask questions of Usyk until Usyk asked questions of him, and the answers weren't forthcoming. Then there was Jarrell Miller. Miller probably didn't ask the questions we thought he would, but Dubois asked questions of Miller that Miller struggled with. And that led us to Hrgović. And Hrgović asked a lot of questions. Hrgović really asked, is the man we see in front of us really at that top table? So people say that this is for the IBF Heavyweight Championship, but if you really flip it around and, with a cynical mind, the loser of this is going to be labeled as a guy that can't get it done. When it's time to be a warrior, the loser of this will get that label of they never quite did it at the top level. They were never able to dominate the elite. That's what's going to be happening. And more cynical, and I'm sure you'll see this in many of the social media groups that, kind of orbit the sport of boxing. You're going to see this. People are going to talk about somebody choking, someone not having bottle, and God forbid, someone quitting. Now, if you're Don Charles, your goal is to make sure that's not Daniel, right? You've waited your whole career to be given a talented heavyweight in his prime years who you're not having to teach from scratch, but you can help mold still. He's got that. We're now watching to go, what do you do with this Don? Because, and I love Don Charles. I think Don Charles is a class act. Been a useful mentor for me. giving me a lot of really good advice and guidance. But I was there when Don said if they gave me the heavyweights they gave everybody else, see what I would do. Saturday night, Saturday the 21st, we should find out. So there's a lot of pressure on Don as well, because what we don't want is Chisora 2. Daniel Dubois is an amateur, 70 wins, 5 losses. Best young heavyweight in this country at one point. Best young heavyweight in Europe at one point. Potential Olympic gold medalist at one point. Don Charles has that now. There are no excuses. Everything you've ever wanted to do with a heavyweight, you can do with Daniel. So Saturday the 21st, we're going to say you've had enough time. You've been with him long enough. He's heard all the stories. He's heard the music. You've shown him the fatherly love that he needs. You've got him in the right headspace. After Saturday, we won't really entertain excuses. So there is some pressure on Don, but there's also pressure on Daniel because he's the guy taking the shots. And when you're offered this fight as a coach and you're offered a situation like this, what you're really thinking is, where are the main areas that we're going to win this fight? And that's actually more of an internal journey. You're not even looking at your opponent at this point. What you're looking at is the fighter I've got versus the fighter I need him to be. So Don should be asking himself, and he is, I'm sure of this, what's the next level Daniel needs to hit? And what does that look like? How can Daniel find that level that goes from a guy that was mowing people over at British and fringe European level to a guy that can have a sustained run at the top? Because when I see Daniel, I see someone who should have been like Riddick Bowe. Because when he was younger, he had a bit of that to him. And he lost it. And he lost it because he started off in the wrong gym. You can talk about, how he trained as an amateur in many of those gyms. They didn't know what to do with him. They didn't know how to give him those layers of competence, those layers of skill, those layers of decision making that would have separated him from everybody. You never got the sense with Dubois that you do with Moses Atauma that there are more levels to come. With Daniel, it was always about a power game. So the real question is, what's that higher level? And if we look at his recent kind of performances and his canon of work, you're really looking at that Hrgovic fight, because Hrgovic is the guy that he fought that I would argue is fringe world level or world level. Like, it wouldn't be a surprise for Hrgovic to fight for a world title at some point in his career. It wouldn't be a surprise to see him go for WBC or WBO because he's still viable. But Daniel was getting caught way too much with really basic punches. And it was like he couldn't see them coming. He had to react after he got hit. And that's a worry. And I think what saved him is that Hrgovic isn't a devastating puncher. He hits hard enough, but he's not devastating. But he was able to land at will. If you go back and watch that fight, how many times did Hrgovic throw the 1-2? And even if that right hand missed, he just threw a left hook to the body, knowing Daniel would be there every time. So when you talk about next level and moving a level up, the ability to deal with somebody's jab is key, right? You've heard me talk numerous times about chains. Boxing is really just a sequence of chains. So someone throws a jab at me, I block it, I slip it, whatever. But that should trigger a sequence of events that move me out the way of harm and put me in position to attack almost immediately. That's the higher level. So when you watch really good boxers, when you watch your Mayweathers, your Canelos, that is all they do. It's all a sequence, it's all sequences, it's all series of chains. And it's very hard to cope with that if you don't have a boxing brain. Now, the thing is, Daniel does have a boxing brain. We know that because, as we said, 75 amateur bouts, 70 wins. Okay? He, up until that point, 22 amateur fights. I think it was 20 wins and 19 stoppages. Daniel knows what he's doing in a boxing ring. At least conceptually, he does. Mechanically is where we have questions. Like Hrgović knows what he's doing. Hrgović has been around top-level guys for over a decade. He's been classed for a long time. So, all things considered, Hrgović was a good test because it showed where all the fault lines are with Daniel. There's a lack of head movement. Can't use his hands to defend. Really, there's no defensive structure in what he does. And so what that means is he has to retreat, reset, and go again. He can't stay in the pocket and ride shots. He can't stay in the pocket and just sort of catch shots and come back. And that would make him even more devastating. It comes back to the point I'm saying about he could have been a Riddick Bowe. But it's not like it's a close gap between where he is now and where Riddick was. It's so vast now that you've almost got to simplify this and go, Daniel's going to be a power guy. Cool. If he's going to be a power guy, don't have him slipping and sliding. At least let him have a tight guard. Yeah. Just go in with a tight guard and go, right, what we're going to do is have this tight guard and we're going to walk AJ down behind the jab. We're not going to do anything else. We're going to double jab with little steps to our left every time. We're going to pin his right hand down and force Joshua to start either counter jabbing or hooking. But we're going to force him to do stuff going backwards we know he cannot do. And the more we make him do that, the less belief he has, the more tired he's going to get, because we know he hasn't done this in camp, because the guys in camp can't push him backwards. And that's no disrespect to them. They're just not at his level yet. Daniel has to, like, on whatever whiteboard they have, the first thing I'm saying is, point number one, we have to move Joshua backwards. We have to move him backwards, preferably going to his left. And here's why. Daniel can't throw a straight right. So he can't throw an arrow straight right down the middle, which Klitschko showed you is the punch that really hurts Joshua because he doesn't see it, much like Daniel doesn't see it. He doesn't see it. But Daniel throws that kind of wide arcing right hand, and you need someone to be walking into it. Hrgović didn't, if you watch the fight. Hrgović turned away from it, so it ended up kind of hitting Hrgović on the trap or sometimes on the lat. And you'll take those all day. But like I said, it's about finding that higher level. And if we just recap where that higher level is right now, it's having a solid defensive chain so that when someone does jab, you're not just dealing with the jab, you're understanding that stuff is going to happen after that jab, and you shouldn't be there to be a victim of it, right? Then there's the understanding of your tactical situation. You're not going to be a guy that slips and slides. You're not going to be a guy that's doing crazy rig and down pivots. So if this is really about winning and winning well, you're going to have to go guard up and catch shots on your forearms, catch him on your wrists, catch him on your gloves, and walk AJ down behind that double jab, but making sure you position him where you want him for that kind of archy right hand. So that's kind of the main block, right? And that's just taking what he already has and making sure that it's pointed in the right direction and that the mission is clearly understood. You see, one of my worries is the fight starts and Daniel starts retreating, giving AJ confidence. And we've seen with numerous opponents, they've thought that they can go back just to come forward again. And AJ doesn't really let you do that. If you look at when Ruiz was at his best against him, if you look at when Usyk was at his best against him, or in both fights, they took it to AJ. That's when AJ struggles. Once you start going back to the ropes, you're meat and drink for AJ. And, you know, that shouldn't be forgotten. Anthony Joshua is still a dangerous guy. Yeah, still a dangerous guy. You don't get as far as he has in boxing without being dangerous. We should respect that. But, and here's another point for the tactics board. We've always suspected he's vulnerable to the body. And that a sustained body attack would actually be hell for him. But we don't see many people try that. Mainly because most big heavyweights don't have a body game because they don't need one. It's the guys like Michael Hunter, it's the guys like Ricardo Torres Jr. Smaller heavyweights tend to have that body game. In fact, let's put Bacoli in there as well, because he's boxing like a small heavyweight. So as does Derek. And it's not a coincidence that Joshua hasn't said I'd fight Derek, because he knows those body shots will be brutal. If Daniel hasn't prepared for that in camp, it's going to get rough for him, because that's where the advantage is. As we said earlier, double jab up top, get Joshua moving. If the guard's high, just rip a right hook to the body. Rip a right hook to his arm if you have to. Just hit flesh with that right hand, right? And then bring the left hook in. I guarantee there'll be an opportunity for the left hook. If you go double jab, big right hook, there'll be an opportunity for that left hook. Because just the reaction to a heavy shot on that side means that the opening will just appear. Now, whether it's behind the elbow, whether it's inside, I can't tell you. But the opening will come. And then once the opening comes, you can bring a right hand over the top. And everything I'm saying now is just pretty basic stuff. You would tell this to a kid sparring at Power Day hooks, right? This is really basic boxing, but pros forget it. And the reason I'm saying all of this is there's something you notice when you watch Daniel. He can't help but square up. So Daniel's not going to be a guy that's going to keep himself narrow, right? He's going to be square on, and he's going to be pretty easy to hit. And when you're square on, it's very hard to defend because the target's too big. And so the tactics I'm giving are just like, if we're not going to change that, then let's just behave like an Abrams tank, right? And just march forward and hope we don't get hit with the Iskander missile. But these things are all very simple, very easy to achieve if you practice them in camp. Attacking that body, making sure that you weaken Anthony Joshua. And then the other thing on top of that is to catch him in his rest breaks. Because you see it, Joshua will throw 4 heavy shots, maybe 2 land, the other 2 don't. And then he goes for a retreat, you can see his mouth open. Getting that air in, because 250 pounds of muscle, and we know it's a legit 250 pounds, not that WWE stuff, that's a lot of metabolic effort. Some will say it's similar for Daniel, but Daniel looks like he's built to be that big, and you can tell because of the size of his old man. And this is where Daniel doesn't have to always throw heavy shots. This is my frustration with heavyweights. They assume every punch has to be hard. It need only be hard enough. Hard enough that your opponent can't ignore it. And that's how you keep Joshua busy. Have him slipping, sliding, rolling, ducking. All of that stuff that's going to tire him out. And is going to leave him out of position to launch his attacks. Because Ben will want AJ in very, very precise positions. And we'll talk about that in the next episode. And Daniel's job is to disrupt that. But you can't disrupt that if you're not structured. Can't be making stuff up as you go along. And it felt a bit like that with Hrgovic. He was just making it up as they went along. And the problem with that is there weren't a lot of tools that he could tap into, which was a real shame. But I don't want to say all this to be negative. I'm saying this because it's high stakes. And if you're not prepared to challenge everything, then your fight is going to struggle. So they're the things, like in terms of just hard tactics, that's what you're looking to do. You're not really going to program any head movement in because it's too hard. So you're just going to rely on just mechanics. You know, get some flesh in between the punch and your face and you're normally good. But make sure, based off that, you're in position to attack straight back. Because if you deny AJ those rest breaks that you know he's been getting in camp, you suddenly take his 12 rounds of effort and you can compress it into 7 or 8 rounds. Now it's in your favor. That's the power of being structured, being focused, and having a decent pace to what you do. And so they're the things I'd have on the tactics board. When you sit down and you talk to your coaches and you're like, what's this fight really going to turn on? I'm confident it will turn on which Daniel shows up. If it's the Daniel that fought Joe Joyce and he had a bit of a rabbit in the headlights moment, maybe not. But that guy that gave Usyk all he could handle for a few rounds, he could do something here. But attitude is cool. All that other stuff is cool. If you don't have the structure and the tactical plan, you're not going to do it. And if you notice, I haven't talked about anything overly complicated, 18 phase attacks, holding your feet, short to mid range. I haven't talked about anything like that because that's stuff to entertain fans. What you understand is this is just going to be a fight. And 80% of this fight is me imposing my will on you. If I'm not imposing my will on you, I can't win the fight. You saw it with Caleb Plant against Macumbi. Once Caleb started to impose his will, Macumbi started to fade. Once you take that confidence, which comes from being able to come forward, once you take that away from someone, they're a completely different fighter. And that's what I want to see from Daniel. And the reason I say that is if you look at Daniel, there's a lot of upside to a really good version of Daniel Dubois. Likeable, kind of does what we want a heavyweight to do. We can take the mickey out of some of the things he does, but when we watch him take people out, we just nod our heads and go, yeah, that's a powerful kid. Right? And he's still young, so these are his prime years. If he can't impose himself on Anthony Joshua, who, remember, is in his mid-30s now, that body has carried him through his boxing career for 15 years now. Not missing a session. Injuries piling up. If Dubois can't break down that version of Joshua, as I said right at the beginning of this episode, you're going to start asking questions about choking and struggling on the big occasion. But there's no need for that. If they keep it really simple, like Andy Ruiz did, and he said, let's have the fight a little bit closer than you want it, so you can feel this hand speed, and I can show you that my chin's pretty decent. And he did that. And he touched Joshua absolutely everywhere. To the point where, remember, Joshua sat in that corner and said to Rob, why am I feeling like this? That's the feeling that Daniel should be trying to create. That's what I'd want to see. Because I ultimately think this is about what mindset Daniel Dubois can get into. How in sync he is with Don Charles. Is he walking in there going, I will do everything Don tells me to do? Because if he is, he stands a chance. If he's in there trying to freestyle it, he won't, because Joshua will see that. AJ's too experienced now. This learning on the job thing we need to park. He's a former heavyweight champion. Like, he sees it with his own eyes. We always talk about the Ben Davison master plan. It's weird how we only ever hear about the master plan after the fight, right? Never hear about it before. I've seen him interviewed a couple of times where it's like, well, what are your thoughts on Dubois? And he just gets to stammering, almost as if he hasn't got his script prepared yet. But it's okay. Me personally, I'd love to see Daniel win. And I don't really have a dog in this race, but I'd like to see Daniel win. A, for Daniel, B, for South London, because they need that. C, for Don Charles. I really want Don to make enough dough in the next couple of years that he never has to pay rent on a gym. The gym he has is the gym he owns. I'll always be a supporter and a backer of Don Charles because I know what a good man he is. And I know that he's dirt tracked his way to these sorts of positions. And he's done it by being a man of honor and integrity. And I hope Daniel fights for him. I hope he fights for him because Don Charles is a man of honor and integrity. And I think Daniel should represent that in the ring on Saturday. So if you're asking me how Daniel wins, as I said, if you've got the tactical whiteboard up there, it's one, just accept he's not going to be a guy that moves his head a lot. Yeah, so get that guard up. Push AJ back and to his left, using your double jab and some sharp footwork. And that will open up the right hand. Don't just stick to that. Start bringing the shots to the body as well. Make AJ feel uncomfortable everywhere. Hit him in the breastbone. Underrated place. You just hit him with all four knuckles down that breastbone. It will humble him. That's what I want to see. And I want to see real pace in this. Don't let AJ breathe. Work him. Even if you get tired, you're younger, you will recover quicker than he will. Exploit the fact that he's in his mid-30s. Really push him. Because we forget that there's history between these guys. Yeah? There's real history. Daniel Dubois, no one talks about this. Daniel turned pro because he understood if he waited till 2020, he might miss that window where he could fight AJ. They always say it was about Fraser Clark, and it kind of was. But once you realize that Fraser wasn't going anywhere, you then said, well, can we get Joshua? And it's like, well, if we start now, we can catch him. So all Dubois has ever had on his mind, and let's talk honestly, is getting to Joshua. Less worried about Fury, getting to Joshua. He plays dumb sometimes, right? But in Daniel's head, he's always wanted this. Who's the better man? He's got what he wanted. All the sparring rumors, he dropped Joshua, he did this, he did that. And look, I can tell you what I heard at the time. Yes, I heard he did that, but I've also heard that people have done similar to him. And it's not a good or bad thing. It's an exciting thing. But it's a reminder that you can't read too much into what happens in sparring. What I do know from those sessions is Dubois is stronger than AJ. Like in terms of just man strength. And that's another source of advantage. But ultimately, when you look at this fight, this is the fight Daniel Dubois has always wanted. This is his FA Cup final, his Champions League final, his World Cup final. This is everything rolled into one. His chance to cement himself as the number one Brit heavyweight. And people tell me it's Tyson Fury, but Fury's on a defeat right now, so maybe not. And it opens up the opportunity to rematch Usyk and to see if you can actually put him down. So there's a lot riding on this. Like from a promotional perspective, the boxing story and the fans and all that engagement. But in Daniel's head, this is a showdown he's always wanted. He would never have said no to this fight. He would have taken this fight last year, the year before that. He would have taken this fight on his debut. He has no excuse. He has watched AJ every time. He's seen every fight. He knows sparring partners. They talk. He knows. If he's not ready for this now, he never will be. He just never will be. So I wish him all the best. I wish Don and the team all the best. And I just hope we see a version of Daniel Dubois that's better than anything we've seen before. Because if it doesn't start there, then it's over already. And I think that's kind of how I feel about that fight. From a Daniel perspective, I think those are the key elements. It's understanding that. He's two defeats in. One against Joe Joyce, one against Usyk. No shame in those two guys. Both work rate monsters. But that third defeat, just like with Joshua, that third defeat, we're starting to ask questions at that top table. Are you really the man? Saturday the 21st, we find out for Daniel Dubois. So as I said, look, I'm going to do one for Joshua as well, because I think these guys just deserve their own space. Just because there's a lot of elements to do, and if I'd done both at the same time, I'd be here for about 2 hours. So make sure you tune into the Joshua episode as well. It depends what order you get these in. So make sure you tune in, right? Make sure you get both episodes. If I do an overall one as well, make sure you get that one too, okay? Appreciate the support and the love as always, guys. Take care.